Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 2 to 5 player Puerto Rico 1897, designed by Andreas Seyforth and published by Aaliyah and Ravensburger, who helped sponsor this video. Based on the original best-selling Puerto Rico, this new edition set in 1897 has the players taking on the roles of Puerto Rican farmers at the end of the colonial era, competing for their own prestige and wealth. This version includes 4 expansions in the box, as well as updated art and history of the time and setting, but otherwise plays exactly like the other editions. I'm going to cover the core rules in this video and then give you a quick overview of the expansions at the end. So join me at the table and let's learn how to play. To set up, put this board in the middle of the play area and notice its various boxes, which are labeled with either black or red titles. Now find the included tiles that show a variety of buildings with their names printed in the top with black text. You then place these into the matching spaces for them on the board, and in cases where you have more than one copy of the same building, stack them together in the same space. The spots for buildings with red titles are only used in the optional expansion, so leave these blank for now. On this side of the board, you set the coins, which come in denominations of 1s and 5s. These hexagon tokens are known as the victory point chips, and referring to this chart found in the rulebook, you'll only use as many as are listed for your number of players. In this video, we'll assume we have 3 players, so we keep a total of 75 victory point chips and return the rest back to the box. These are the workers, and you'll create a supply of them based on this table found in the rulebook. In our 3-player game, this means we use 55 of them, returning the rest back to the box. Nearby, set this work register and place as many workers on it from your supply as the number of players, so in this case, 3. Also set this trading house tile nearby and some cargo ships. This table in the rulebook will tell you exactly which ships to use for your number of players. In our case, the ones showing 4, 5, and 6 spaces. The others, we return to the box. These pieces represent the various barrels of goods known as corn, fruit, sugar, tobacco, and coffee, which you'll keep nearby. Just so you know, to make it easier for me as I move things around on screen during this video, I'll be setting many of the various tokens and pieces in some trays that I have. Now each player chooses one of the included island boards, and they all work the same way but have different Puerto Rican farmers pictured, so pick your favorite. In a 3-player game, each player starts with 2 coins. And coins must be kept on your board in such a way that everyone can easily see how many you have. Also note, in a 4-player game, each person starts with 3 coins, and in a 5-player game, everyone gets 4 coins each. Now find the estate tiles, which will all have this back. On their faces, they'll either show the symbol for quarries, or they'll be a type of good represented by one of these symbols and a colored bar on the far right. These represent corn, fruit, sugar, tobacco, and coffee estates. Then pick someone to be the first player and give them this governor tile and 1 green fruit estate. Then going clockwise around the table, each other person also takes an estate tile based on these instructions in the rulebook for your number of players. In our 3-player game, it means the next person also gains a fruit tile, but the 3rd player takes a corn estate. Anytime you collect an estate tile, you set it face up into any open countryside space of your board, which are the 12 you find here at the top. Now coming back to the remaining estate tiles, first find the 8 quarry tiles, which again have this symbol in their corner, and place them in a face-up stack. Then flip the remaining estate tiles face down and give them a good mix. You'll then deal a row of estate tiles equal to 1 more than the number of players, so 4 in this case. Finally, within reach of all the players, set a certain amount of these roll tiles based on your number of players as shown here in the rulebook. In a 3-player game, we'll use all of them except for the 2 labeled as Adventurer. Any other components you find in this edition are for optional expansions and can be left in the box. And that's the setup. Now there are some adjustments for a 2-player game, but we'll mention those briefly at the end of this video. In Puerto Rico 1897, players will be competing to grow and produce goods which they'll trade and ship for money and victory points. You'll also construct buildings to give you special advantages and even more points. In the end, the player with the most points wins. The game is played over a number of rounds, and the rounds follow a unique structure that we should go over first. At the start of a round, the first player, which is the one with the governor tile, will pick any one of the roll tiles in the center of the play area to collect and set in front of themselves. They then perform the action provided by that roll, which is listed here at the top. In this case, they would get to build. And we'll learn the various actions soon, but they also gain the advantage provided by the roll they took, shown here at the bottom of its tile. Once the governor has performed the action on the roll they took, Going in clockwise order around the table once, each other player, one at a time, also gets to perform the action on the roll that was collected. So each other player will get to perform a build action as well, but they don't gain the advantage of that roll. So again, the player who claims a roll performs the action and gains the advantage. Everyone else performs the action, but not the advantage. After, the player seated to the left of the governor now picks one of the remaining rolls in the center of the play area and performs its action and its advantage. Then, going in clockwise order from them, the rest of the players also perform its action, but as you might have guessed, not the advantage. Once that's done, the next player, which in this case is just off screen, picks one of the remaining rolls, and you do the same thing again. They'll perform the action and advantage, and going clockwise, everyone else just performs the action. Once every player has had a chance to collect a roll, and those rolls have been resolved, the round ends. With the round over, a silver coin is then set on each roll that wasn't taken during the round. And then players return their chosen rolls back to the center of the play area. The governor tile is then passed to the left, and that person starts the next round just as before, picking and resolving any roll tile from the center of the play area. If a player picks a roll with coins on it, they also gain the coins. And in this way, if a roll is not taken over several rounds, it will gain more and more coins, making it more attractive as a roll for someone to collect. It's important to understand that all actions are optional. Even if this player takes the roll tile, they don't have to perform the action that it provides. They can just pass. But if they do, each other player going around the table may still perform the action of that roll if they want to. But they can also choose not to if they don't want. The one exception is the captain's roll, which, as we'll see later, once taken, must be resolved by each player if they're able to. And with that understood, now we just need to learn the various rolls and what they allow you to do. So let's go through each of them, starting with the planter. When resolving this planter action, you pick any one of the face-up estate tiles from the row that was created in the center of the play area during the setup. If you're the person who took the planter roll itself, you also gain the advantage of being able to take one of these quarry tiles instead. Players cannot take one of these normally, only when they're resolving the advantage, and we'll see why each of the different estate tiles could be useful later. In this example, let's assume we collected one of the quarry tiles. After taking an estate tile, you must immediately place it into one of the open spaces of your countryside here at the top of your personal board. And you can always rearrange the tiles you have in this area anytime you like. The only restriction is you cannot remove tiles from it. Any you take must stay here. I had mentioned that the player who takes the planter roll gets to take a quarry tile or one of these face-up ones, while each other player can only take one of these. However, if this quarry stack runs out, then this advantage is ignored, and the player taking the planter roll from that point on will only be able to take a single tile from the face-up row, just like everyone else. Once each of the other players have finished resolving this action, end the planter phase by moving any remaining face-up tiles into a discard pile, and then flip a number of new tiles equal to the number of players plus 1 into a face-up row. If you ever run out of estate tiles to draw, just shuffle all the discarded ones into a new face-down pile and continue drawing as necessary. If the discard pile also runs out and you can't fully refill the face-up estate row, the planter action can no longer be taken. As a player, you also can't resolve the planter action if your countryside is already full of tiles. You would have to pass if you took this roll or if someone else did. And remember, except for the captain's roll, which we'll learn about later, every other action is optional. So if you don't want to take an estate tile during the planter action, you don't have to. And with that understood, now let's move on to learning how the builder roll works. When performing this build action, you pick any one building from the central game board and purchase it. The cost of each building is printed in the yellow circle here. So this large fruit warehouse would cost 3 in coins, which you pay from the coins you have, returning them to the supply. I only have 2 coins, and you can't build a tile you can't afford. However, the advantage of the builder roll is that the player who claims that roll spends 1 less to buy their chosen tile. So if I had taken this roll, I could afford this fruit warehouse by paying just the 2 coins that I have. Then I collect that tile from the board. After taking a building, you then place it onto any one of your empty city spaces, which are the ones here at the bottom of your board. During this phase, you're allowed to move your buildings around, which you might want to do if you're collecting one of these larger buildings and need to make room, because these take up two of the adjacent spaces like this. Just keep in mind, you can never remove a building that you've built, and if you run out of spaces for new buildings, you must pass during this action. The other important restriction is that you may never have more than one building with the exact same name. For example, I couldn't have two large fruit warehouses, but I could have a large one and a small one because these have different names. So that's the build action. You pick a single building tile to purchase and add it to your estate, paying its full cost unless you were the one who took the roll tile, in which case you get a 1 coin discount. Each building has a special ability. For example, if you have this hacienda, then anytime you're resolving the planter's action, you may first take a face-down estate tile, which you then add to your board, and then you get to take a face-up estate tile as usual. We're not going to go through every building and their effects in this video, as how they work is detailed in the rulebook and summarized on the back here. So just refer to those areas when playing to see the advantages they provide. Now though, let's move on to learning what happens when the recruiter roll is collected. The person who took this roll begins by using their advantage, which allows them to take one of the worker discs from this supply. If this supply is ever empty, this advantage is ignored. Then they perform the main action of this roll, taking a single worker from those available on this worker register. Then the next player in clockwise order performs the action, taking one worker from here, and then the next player does. Unlike the other rolls, where players will go clockwise around the table once, performing the roll's action, for this one, you go around and around until all of the workers have been collected from the register. Now in this case, we had exactly 3 workers on here, and there's 3 players. So we only had to go around once to empty this. But during some rounds, you'll have more or fewer workers on this tile than the number of players. For example, if we had started with 5 workers here, the player taking the recruit action would again gain the advantage first, taking a worker from the supply, and then taking one from the register. In our 3-player game, the second player would gain this worker, and the third player would gain this one. Then going back to the player who initiated the roll, they would gain another worker, and the next player in clockwise order would take this last one. Each player now adds the workers they've collected to any of the semicircles marked on their estates or building tiles. They may also rearrange any workers they had previously placed, moving them to new spaces. We'll see why it matters in a moment. But in brief, a tile doesn't provide you with any benefits until a worker has been placed on it. But you can only rearrange your workers when the recruitment roll is being resolved. Then they'll have to stay where they are until the next time this roll is picked. If you've ever collected more workers than you have spaces to place them, in that situation and only then do you put the extra workers on your board here. The next time the recruiter roll is being resolved, you then move these workers to any open spaces that you may have. Placing workers you collected is normally done in turn order, starting with the player who chose the roll and going clockwise. But if players agree, you can decide to place them simultaneously. Once all workers have been placed that can be, you end this roll by counting all of the empty worker spaces on building tiles on all players' island boards, making sure not to include empty estate or quarry tiles, only buildings. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. You then add that many workers from the supply to the work register. If the number of workers you would add to the register is less than the number of players, then add workers equal to the number of players instead. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, the various buildings and estate tiles have benefits, but only if they have a worker placed on them. So let's take a moment here and see an example of that. When a tile has a worker, it's said to be active, and then you gain that tile's benefit. So this is an active quarry, and this is an inactive quarry, providing no benefit. Going back to the builder roll action, when resolving it, each active quarry you have reduces the cost of a building by 1 up to the limit shown on the edge of the main board here. For example, any building on these 2 rows can have its cost reduced by 1 from quarries. Well, any buildings on these 2 rows can have their cost reduced by up to 3, assuming you have 3 active quarries. So even if I had 3 active quarries, I could only reduce the cost of a building from either of these 2 rows by at most 1. We'll see some of the other benefits of active buildings as we learn about the next role I want to explain, the Craftsman. Let's pretend it's later in the game and my board looked like this. When resolving the Craftsman action, the active estates of your board can produce goods. Corn is a good place to start because each of your cornfields with a worker on it will produce 1 barrel of corn goods represented by these yellow tokens. So although we have 3 corn fields, only 2 are active with workers, so we only produce 2 barrels. Any goods you collect are placed on your board in an area where players can easily see how many you have. The other types of fields work a little differently. They also produce if they're active, but only equal to the number of workers you have on the related buildings required to produce them. Production buildings are any with a colored bar down their right side. So for example, this is a large fruit warehouse, and green is the color of the related fruit barrels. I also have this small fruit warehouse. The total number of workers I have on these 2 buildings is 3, so at most I can produce 3 fruit barrels. However, I only have 2 active fruit fields. So even though I could produce up to 3 fruit barrels, the most I can collect are 2. If this third field was also active with a worker, then I could have collected a total of 3 fruit barrels. But that wasn't the case, so I'll take this back. Tobacco storage is a building used to help produce tobacco, and I have 1 active worker here. So at most, I can produce and collect 1 tobacco barrel, even though I have 3 active tobacco fields. If I had another worker here, I could produce 2 barrels or 3 barrels if all of these slots were full. So that's how production works, and all players in turn order produce as many goods as their active estates and buildings allow. After, the player who took this role then gains the advantage of being able to take a single extra good matching one of the types they just produced with this action. If they produced nothing, they don't get this advantage. And keep in mind, the goods barrels are limited to what comes in the game. Once a type is gone that you're owed, you simply don't get those barrels. And with that understood, now let's learn about the trader role. When resolving this action, you may pick any 1 goods barrel from your board and add it to an empty space of this trading house tile, collecting the number of coins shown in its matching colored circle here. So if I sell this tobacco barrel, I would get 3 coins. The person who selected this role also gains 1 extra coin as long as they sold something. As each player gets a turn to sell 1 item, there are a few restrictions. First, you cannot sell a type of good that is currently on the trade board. So now no other player can sell tobacco. Maybe they'd sell sugar instead. In this 3-player game, at most, 3 goods will be sold since each player will only get 1 turn around the table, and then this roll is finished. You do not remove the goods from the trade market. Instead, the next time the trader roll is resolved, players will only have the spaces left to put goods into. As soon as this tile's spaces are full, that will end all trades. Anyone yet to go will just be skipped. The goods on this tile are then returned to the supply, which empties this tile for the next time the trader roll is chosen. Now we come to the captain's role, and when this is chosen, players will be able to ship goods they've produced. Unlike most rounds, where each player gets only 1 turn, when this role is chosen, players will take turns going around and around the table until no more goods can be shipped. The person who selected this role begins by choosing any 1 type of good that they may have, loading as many barrels of that good as they can onto any one of these ships. But the catch is that no ship can have the same fruit as any other ship. Let's say, for example, this boat had had 1 fruit already on it from a previous round. That means I couldn't add my fruit barrels to this ship because I'd be creating more than 1 ship with the same type of good. I'd have to add them to this ship, which already has fruit, even if it doesn't have enough space for all of the fruit that I could potentially ship. Even once this ship is full, fruit cannot be added to another ship. Also, a ship can never contain any more than 1 type of good. Let's pretend this ship already had some corn. That means a player could not add any sugar they have to this ship, as it already has another type of good on it. If you have a choice between ships, you must always pick the one that would allow you to place as much of the good that you've chosen to ship as possible. Going back to the start of my turn, let's pretend instead of shipping fruit, I had decided to ship my tobacco. I have 6 barrels, so I couldn't pick this ship. It would only allow me to load 4, and I'd still have 2 left over. I also couldn't pick this ship. It would only hold 5. So I would have to load these barrels into this ship. If more than 1 ship could equally fit the goods you've chosen, for example, let's say I'd only had 5 tobacco, then you can pick either of the valid ships. Just keep in mind, these rules only kick in once you've picked which type of good you want to ship. I don't have to pick tobacco to ship first, even though I have the most goods of that type to ship. I could pick my sugar instead. However, if I do pick this good, then I must put it in the ship that can legally take it and hold as much of it as possible. Let's say I decide to ship my 4 fruit and I put it on this boat. After shipping, you receive 1 victory point for each good you placed onto the boat taken from this supply. If you were the player who chose the captain's role, you get a bonus victory point. Victory points, unlike money, are kept face down on your board, so it's not as easy for players to see how many points you have. And to make it harder to track, players should feel free to trade in 5 of their value 1 victory points for a value 5 victory token as they like. After the first player picks a good and ships as much of it as possible, the next player goes. And players will continue taking turns around and around the table until everyone has shipped as many goods as they can, skipping any players who can't ship anymore. Just know when it comes to your turn, although you can pick which type of good you want to ship, you can't choose not to ship goods on your turn if it would be possible to ship something. This action, unlike all of the others, is not optional. You must perform it if you can when it comes to your turn. Once no more goods can legally be placed on the ships, each player must pick 1 good, if any that they have, left on their board to store. All the rest of the goods you must return to the general supply. You can think of those goods as spoiling. Just remember though, you can always pick 1 good to keep. If you have buildings like the small or large warehouse, their abilities will let you store even more goods at this point, which again you'll find reminders of in the rulebook and on its back. As the very last step of resolving the captain role, every ship that is completely full has its goods returned to the general supply. Any that still have empty spaces remain as they are, meaning there'll be fewer spaces to fill in the next time this role is taken. This brings us to the final role, the adventurer. This is not used in a 3-player game, but we should go over it so that you know how to use it in a 2, 4, or 5-player game. This is quite unique because it has no action associated with it, only an advantage. This means you won't take turns around the table. Instead, only the player who chooses this role will resolve anything, and they simply gain 1 coin from the supply. And those are all the different roles and how they work. Remember, a round starts with the governor first choosing one of the roles and resolving it, and then everyone else has a chance to repeat the action. Then the next player picks a role, and everyone else has a chance to repeat that new action, and this will continue until every player has had a turn picking one of the roles. At that point, the round ends. Each role that wasn't chosen now has a silver coin added to it, and all of the roles that had been taken are then returned to the center of the play area. The governor tile is then passed to the next player in clockwise order, and a new round begins with the new governor picking the first role. The game will continue like this until it ends when at least one of these 3 possible outcomes happen. Either there are not enough workers to resupply the work register at the end of the recruiter role, or if 1 or more players have filled in all of the city spaces of their island board after the builder role has been resolved, or finally the game will also end if the last victory point chip is taken during the resolution of the captain's role. Now all players should still gain any points they're owed from goods they ship after the tokens run out, so just keep track of those points with a pen and paper if necessary. So those are the 3 possible ways the game can end, which are listed here in the rulebook if you need a reminder. And once at least one of them has occurred, you finish that round fully, and then the players calculate their final scores. This includes all victory point tokens you have, including any you had to record if the victory tokens ran out during the captain action. To that, add the value of the victory points printed on all the buildings you have, which are shown inside of a black hexagon icon like this. And you earn these points whether or not the building has a worker assigned to it. If you have a large building, these will have some kind of end game scoring bonus to calculate as well. These will require a worker to trigger their bonus. For example, if you have the fortress, for every 3 workers you have on your island board, you gain 1 victory point. The player with the most points wins. If there's a tie, the tied player with the most coins and goods barrels on their board wins. If there's still a tie, the tied players share the victory. And with that understood, let's quickly discuss the 2-player rules. You'll find those detailed here where it explains the changes to the setup, including instructions to put out all of the role tiles except for 1 copy of the adventurer's role. The actual gameplay remains pretty much the same. The governor picks a role and takes the related action and advantage, and the other player gets just the action. Then the other player picks a role and gains the action and advantage, while the governor just performs the action. Now at this point, the round isn't over, even though both players have picked a role. Instead, you'll continue going back and forth like this, taking roles until each player has collected 3 roles for themselves. At that point, the round ends and is resolved as usual, and the governor tile is passed, and then a new round begins. The game also comes with an expansion called New Buildings, detailed here, which gives you several new buildings to construct, each with additional abilities that are also detailed in the rulebook and here on the back. A second expansion called Citizens gives not just new buildings, but new pieces known as citizens. These work just like regular workers, except when placed in certain buildings, and are each worth a point at the end of the game. A third expansion called Smugglers provides you with a new role that when taken gives that player 4 different actions to choose from, and only they will perform it during that round. Finally, we have the fourth expansion, Festival. This will give you a way to create 3 custom goals for players to try to achieve while playing, earning them a special reward. But all of those expansions I'll leave for you to discover on your own. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Puerto Rico 1897. If you have any questions at all about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can join our Patreon team, which I'll have linked below. But until next time, thanks for watching.